Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, we speak to Peter Moffat, who is the writer of TV shows including Silk, Criminal Justice and Cambridge Spies.
So it was a bit of a first for us on the podcast. We've been looking to have as broad a range of writers as possible, and Peter is our first screenwriter. It was certainly an education for Kassia and myself. This is a world that we're much less familiar with than other areas we've looked at, but Peter was very gracious and covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, he started off talking about his background in the law and how that gradually led him into screenwriting, but it's a fascinating conversation and we hope you enjoy it.
Okay, Peter, can you tell us a bit to start off with about your background and how you made this journey from law into writing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going right back to the start. An army childhood, which meant a boarding school childhood, almost always did if you're an army child. From the age of 8, which connects, I think, to writing in that I had it described the other day as being sent somewhere where nobody loves you.
Okay.
Which is the kind of bad way of looking at it. I think the upside of being sent to somewhere where nobody loves you is that you're 24 hours a day, 12 weeks at a time with people your own age, which necessarily provides you with an extraordinary kind of space for imagination, I think. I think if you put any group of 8-year-olds in dormitories and all of life together, they will imagine hard and they will work well at being things that I suspect, it's probably true, some other kids who are not at boarding schools don't get to be. So in a way for me, horrible homesickness, profound upset, and relationships the like of which I have never replicated.
Sort of trauma bond, as it were.
Trauma bond and use of language, very, very important to your own particular way of speaking with each other, which I know to be true because, of course, when you leave boarding school, I found, and lots of my friends and contemporaries have found, that it's very hard to have relationships which were as good as the ones that you had as a child at school. So life is disappointing for 5 years until you resettle in the world, is what I found. But re-meeting those people from those school days more recently and jumping back into that language and the way that you speak has just reminded me how exciting all that was. And although none of it was self-conscious, I think the speed at which you were asked to, required to, wanted to think and speak and write it is a part of how one might become a writer in the end. It sounds a little pompous. I haven't really thought about it that way before, probably, but I think there's something in it.
I really like that. I'm going to steal that. I was also sent to boarding school at
Really?
age 7, and it was definitely a creative, imaginative space for me, but it was more in a kind of, I sort of made up terrible fibs about my, I made my origins much more exotic than they actually were. I was sort
That's
of like,
really
in my mind, I was the little princess.
Yeah.
And I told different variants of different stories and, of course, got caught out.
Yeah. Well, you were free to, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody knew about who you were and what you were doing. And yeah.
So where does law then fit?
Okay,
Where does the law
so
come
the other
from?
side, sorry, I'm banging on about school life and I will stop in a second.
No.
I went to a really terrible public school in Kent.
Okay.
Terrible in that I got no education at all. I was frightened of a lot of the teachers and spent 10 years avoiding having to learn anything by hiding and being badly behaved in order to hide. And 2 weeks before A-levels, having failed most of my O-levels, I thought, oh God, I've got to get it together, and went across the road to the University at Kent in Canterbury, and spent 2 weeks working really, really hard on A-levels, and to my amazement did tremendously well, having failed everything.
Okay.
And then suddenly the world was open, and I thought, as you do at 18, what would be great to do now that I've got great results? I'll just do law. That sounds exciting. And so I did law. And then the next big choice is, do you want to be a barrister or a solicitor? 4 years on, I thought, well, be a barrister, dress up, do that stuff. So and these decisions, I can honestly say, are based on absolutely nothing.
Okay.
I don't think I had any feeling for the law, any proper reason for wanting to go into it. I'm really glad I did. Really glad I did. I spent 10 years at the criminal bar, taught me a huge amount about writing.
What did it teach you, and why did you think you needed it?
I wasn't a confident enough or good enough advocate to have the nerve not to prepare all my cross-examination in advance, which means staying up all night typically, because you know this. You get a brief at 6 o'clock in the evening and it's for tomorrow morning, and it's 5 days at Southwark Crown Court doing an armed robbery.
So would you try and prepare everything that could happen?
Everything.
It's like a branching tree, right?
Well, it isn't. No, it isn't that, because you have witness statements from prosecution witnesses, so you know what they will probably say in the witness box. There's a kind of great cheat in television and film drama, which is set in legal settings, which is that nobody has any idea what the witness is going to say. And it's important to maintain that, because it's way more exciting. It isn't true at all. Right? Most police officers absolutely replicate in the witness box what's in their notebook and what's in their witness statement. Right? But as an advocate, as a barrister who wants to cross-examine that police officer, what you can then do is you know what their answers to your questions are going to be.
Right.
So in other words, you can construct a structure, you can ask questions which you know will lead to certain answers, which can then lead to other questions, and you can direct a narrative. You can create a narrative.
And it's all in dialogue, right?
And it's all in dialogue, whilst pretending that it's all spontaneous, whilst pretending for the benefit of the jury that the answers that you're getting are not answers that you're expecting at all. Okay, so this is a sort of control of dialogue. This is a control of a narrative, and it's a competing narrative because you're competing with the other side. So if I'm defending Y, the prosecution narrative is the opposite to me. It's an adversarial system. Okay, so the best story wins. It's not about the truth. It's not inquisitorial. We're not after what happened. Okay, we're after finding which version a jury will prefer at the end of the day, and that's storytelling. And it really is. And the best storytellers do win. I really firmly believe that.
Is that what you believed at the time, or is that something you've come to believe since?
Oh, I've seen. I mean, I had a pupil master who's a genius, funniest actor I've ever seen. A barrister, obviously. Great mimic, and just wondrous to listen to. And I think that gives any client 50% more chance, having something like that. I've also seen shockingly bad barristers. There are barristers I know working today who, if I was arrested now and charged with some serious offence, I would have you definitely represent me tomorrow morning at the Old Bailey than a number of them. Definitely. Right?
And it's only really in the criminal law that people are on their feet as much as this, right? That a lot of the commercial barristers, their work is much more written.
Much more written, yeah. My wife's a family lawyer, so she does a lot of spoken stuff too, but criminal law is very particular that way, competing stories. And then, of course, jury speeches, which have to have beginnings and middles and ends, and, you know, make sure that 12 people like it, want to believe it. And that could be damn hard sometimes, advocating for the most ridiculous defences on occasions, you know, trying to get people to buy it. And arguing, I think writing is arguing. I think dialogue is arguing. I think David Mamet is absolutely right, is that you know, people always want something from a conversation, and that's attention. I think that's really important to remember, and it's really true in cross-examination in the witness box, that want two different things.
And when did you start to think that you had writing ambitions beyond these opportunities you were getting in the law?
So the one thing I got from my terrible boarding school was a kind of what actually was The Great Gatsby, A-level Great Gatsby, Scott Fitzgerald, and a sort of appalling 17-year-old romantic idea of what writing and writers might be, which, you know, made me want to be a writer.
Were you an avid reader apart from, The Great Gatsby and kind of schoolwork? Not till
very late. But it's also a horrible block, I think, that kind of romance about writing. I think so many writers are stopped from writing because they think they shouldn't be doing it unless they're as special as James Joyce or Scott Fitzgerald. And I had that for years because I just thought, if I can't be James Joyce, what's the point? And then I wrote a short play, and entered it into the South London International Playwriting Festival at the Warehouse Theatre in Croydon. And me and Abby Morgan were runners-up together. And that meant that you got a reading. Actors came in and read your play. And it's just that sort of embarrassing thing now when I think about it. It's just validation that somebody else had said, this is worthy of being read by actors. And therefore, it's okay to go and be a writer.
What
it's
was the play
pathetic,
about?
really. It's so pathetic. It was called A Fine and Private Place, and it was about an obituarist. I can't remember much about it, to be honest.
And was it clear that you wanted to write drama? Was that always the ambition?
Yeah, so I started writing plays.
Yeah.
I think that dialogue thing comes from those two places, school and law. So that felt like the natural place to start. I read a couple of plays, 2 or 3 plays. One about lawyers at the Hampstead Theatre. The set producer of Kavanagh QC came and saw it and said, do you want to come and write an episode of Kavanagh? I was tremendously snooty about it. I said, I don't want to do that. I want to be a playwright when I grow up. And my wife Leah said to me, how much money do you get for an episode of Kavanagh QC? And she said, well, you're going to go and write television then, aren't you?
But were you still sort of were you still a barrister at this point? Were you doing this on the side?
Yeah. So I was still at the bar and I was trying to do 2 things at once. And I can confess to you, often hoping on a Monday morning that my client would plead guilty so that I could go off and do what I really wanted to do, which was write. And I remember very clearly getting a 4-month fraud trial to do in Southampton. And it felt like the world had ended because I knew it was a huge amount of work beforehand. It would be 4 months in Southampton doing VAT stuff. And I couldn't bear it. And I thought, I've got to stop because I really, really have to get on with doing what I really want to do. And I'll be so cross and angry with myself if I don't. So stop being frightened of it, get on with it, do it, take the plunge, take the risk, jump in. That's bollocks. It's not taking a plunge or taking a risk or being brave. It's incredibly selfish. It's the only thing you want to do. You have to do it. As it goes, my wife was working at the time at the bar and had enough money so that we could afford for me to do it.
Yeah,
I definitely would have done it anyway.
Yeah.
I think it isn't special writing, but I do think I do think writers do have that kind of. You've got to defend your writing time to the death. That's a quote from somebody, and I can't remember where it comes from, but I think I do that. I think there'd have to be an awful lot wrong in my life, an awful lot, for me not to go out of the house every morning and write. Which is an attractive thing to say at all. It's an ugly thing to say, really. I do go out the house. I have to leave the house, yeah.
Do you work sort of in a cafe or public or noisy spaces, or do you have to go somewhere absolutely quiet and still?
So Cafe Nero opens at 6:30 in Kentish Town, which is great. And they play only classical music and nobody comes in there. The coffee's horrible. But the nice Italian franchise owner allows Italian Spanonis. My dog comes with me. We sit together and write. I do the writing. Django the Spinelli doesn't do so much of that. But and then he comes home and I go to the British Library. Yeah. I love the British Library. Do you know? I love the British Library. It's a great place.
I'm not. I stay at home.
Okay.
I just have too many files and piles and stuff.
Okay.
But could you talk a bit about how that whole world of TV and writing for theatre, at the time you were coming in, how it works? It's not a world that we know at all, but how how do you make your way through that? Are you commissioned? Are you pitching ideas, or what's the
they're very different, television and theatre.
Yeah.
I had years ago I got commissioned to write something for the National Theatre. A place was when I was turning into a television writer, and I found that I didn't have the time to do it. And I think about 5 years after I was commissioned, the lovely literary manager at the National rang me up and said, "How's it going?" And in television, you probably got about 3 weeks before somebody rings you up and says, "How's it going?" So it happens 2 ways in telly. You can go to somebody with your idea, or they can come to you with your idea. And typically a writer will have a number of balls in the air. Mm-hmm. So I've got maybe 4 or 5 projects which are at different stages. There are various nightmare scenarios which are, all of them land at the same time, and actually everybody wants to make all of them. That's hard. or they don't. But you kind of have to have it. Normally you get a decent amount of time to write a first episode, a few months to do it properly. But then a television decision about whether it's going to be greenlit or not is made usually on the basis of one episode, and you talking about it a bit. This is in the UK. And then off you go. And once the greenlit is hit, then it's real pressure. It all happens really, really quickly.
So you're writing as they're filming?
Very often.
Yeah.
Very often.
And how much do you know? I mean, obviously, it sounds like it's a little bit of a dialogue between you and what they'll want at the TV studio. Do you know roughly what the shape of the plot will be like, or how long it will run for, or is this very much unknown when you're working on that very first?
You know the number of episodes. I mean, a BBC hour is 58 minutes, and Channel 4 ITV are like 45, 46 minutes. They're very different beasts with breaks. 3 breaks in them. So that's different. You have to think hard about that. The number of episodes. I trust in the writing process in that I take a deliberate and conscious decision not to know what the end is going to be or where it's really going,
and this has come
until
up
the writing process is underway.
In a lot of conversations with novelists that we've had, and also with fiction publishers as well, as to whether you're a planner or a plunger. It's been phrased, but you're the latter, are you?
I think I am a plunger.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to have the your big fat ending sitting there waiting for you, then all well and good. It's not like you not want to have it. You don't pretend it isn't there if you've got it. But so my idea of absolute hell is sitting in a room with a whiteboard with a group of other people thinking hard about what every single scene is going to be and what has to be in it and why, right the way through to the end. Pardon?
Isn't that what you're about to go and
do? That is exactly what I'm about to go and do. But interestingly, so I'm writing the first episode of what will be a 10-hour American show now on my own, right? And that's what happens. You write one episode and then you go and make a writer's room. Might be 8, might be 10, might be 6 people in a room. But I'm thinking differently during the writing. It's really, really interesting. I've got more of a planning head on than I would otherwise have. And I'm really looking forward to the great privilege, actually, of having a bunch of people to talk to all of the time, being paid to listen and to think and to argue about what you're trying to write. Isn't that fantastic? I think that's and so this show.
And that's not the case with traditional British TV. It's one writer.
It's one writer and a script editor.
Okay.
Right, and if you're lucky, a lovely exec producer who might have some of the time to speak to you about how you're doing. But then what I've started to do, what you're not supposed to do in British television, is talk to actors and directors early. Okay. Mostly because they're not cast yet if it's an actor, and they're not employed yet if it's a director. Directors come in really, really late. Okay, I've started to kind of like undermine that, because if I know it's a particular actor that I want is going to be in it and everyone can agree that's a good idea, I get a hold of them really early and we have conversations about a first episode, early drafts. So I hear what they're thinking, and that's fantastic, and that can really change things. And they keep thinking about what they're doing right the way through the process, and that's a terrific, positive thing to have.
Can we take a couple of steps back and go back to that very first offer that you got, that you were sort of snooty about, and then your wife said, "No, you shall." What was that like? How did you go in there into this sort of world that had already been created and go about the business of writing an episode?
So I was lucky because it was Kavanagh QC, so it was about barristers and about the law, and I knew that stuff because that's my background. So 90 minutes to write one story. And what's amazing about legal drama, and what is always a problem for barristers and other lawyers watching it, is they say, well, that's nonsense, that would never happen, that piece of cross-examination is rubbish. But what they always forget, of course, is that you probably have about 90 seconds for a scene in which a witness is cross-examined, and that's it. You have to stuff everything into that.
Why is it so short? Because you lose attention?
Because, well, if you've got a 60-minute episode, which has a story which is a beginning, a middle and an end, which probably has your main returning characters who've got things going on in their lives that you need to pay attention to. You probably have the main character has a particular resonance and connection to the nature of the case that they're doing at that stage. All of that needs your attention. All of that takes up time. Okay, and you might have 4 or 5 witnesses that you need to get through who are important. Okay, and there just isn't much time. So it's a hell of a struggle and a hell of a skill, I think, to kind of pin down, make it as believable as it can be, whilst doing it in such a short time. Some of that, actually, weirdly, skill comes from being at the bar and learning how to manage material and condense material and see what's important, what's not important, and cut to the chase quickly and be effective.
And we always try on the podcast to talk as openly as we can about money and about how the finances of writing work. When you're commissioned to write an episode, is it a flat fee, or how does that work? And how does the money for theatrical commissions compare to TV?
So the really simple big thing about television writing is that you get a fee for writing each episode. If it's made, you get all of that money all over again. Okay. So on the first day of photography, you get 100% of what you've been paid for writing it all over again. So it's a key difference. Getting things made matters financially. I'm a bit out of date now because I haven't written a play for 12, 13 years.
Yeah.
But so much more money than in the theatre. Yeah. It's a huge inducement, I think, for people to want to write television. Luckily, I think, I've fallen into a time when television is really where it's at. Yeah. Not that long ago thinking, oh my God, Nicole Kidman at the Almeida, isn't that amazing? She's taking, she's only getting paid £200 to do something really kind of serious and everything at the Almeida, and that's terrific and everything. But I think it's the other way now. I think, all big actors, film actors are desperate to do telly. Because you get 10 hours or 13 hours of storytelling with you, the actor, at the heart of it. And that's not possible anywhere else.
Yeah. It's a novel, right?
It's a novel, exactly. Yeah.
What's it like psychologically as well? I mean, what fraction of stuff gets made as well? And how does that work psychologically if you're often producing stuff that doesn't get made or things like that? How do you...
So, I've been fortunate in that on the whole, things that I've written have been made. Yeah. I, of course, had things that haven't been made. I don't think William Goldman says that thing about how the thing about nobody knows anything. Nobody in the whole of movie land knows why anything is going to be successful or is not successful. Yeah. It's guesswork, and if you're lucky, it's educated guesswork. Okay, and I think I do wonder sometimes how many really truly genius pieces of television are out there that have never been made and will never be made. It's something I've started to ask lots of executive producers actually in television. Are the things that you think would have been so tremendous and didn't make it? And they all say yes.
Are the ratios of made to non-made different in movies as in TV? Do more film scripts not get made than TV?
More film scripts don't get made, absolutely. And that's to do with financing. Right. That's to do with finding the money. So I've written 2 film scripts, and one wasn't made and one is unlikely to be made. Okay.
You've worked on a sort of couple of shows that have been related to the law, and so you've been able to draw on your own experience. You've already talked a little bit about how you have to sort of really condense things down. What has been the reaction from the world of the legal world to the things that you've created and written?
So I suppose the biggest reaction was I wrote something called Criminal Justice, which was very simple. Ben Whishaw was the lead character. A 21-year-old boy is arrested for the really nasty knife murder of a girl his age. And he has no idea at all about whether he did it. He was so drunk and drugged that he has no memory of doing it, right? So he feels that it can't have been him. He thinks he knows it wasn't him, but he can't be sure, okay? And he tells the truth about that, fatally for him. He tells everybody he comes across, police officers, lawyers, and eventually a jury, that he doesn't know, right? Which is a terrible story in an adversarial system. It's really, really unlikely to secure him a not guilty verdict, okay? Because you need a story in an adversarial system. So he's put under huge pressure by people who are supposed to be on his side, defence solicitors and barristers and so on, and family and so on, to come up with something better than I don't know, right? It was always my kind of great fear at the bar, actually, was that what if you have somebody who looks like they're really, really guilty and just isn't? And we have a system which is the best system possible, I think, which can't cope with that, because they're always going to be found guilty. Beyond all reasonable doubt is how it looks, right? Tough shit. Down you go. And there we are. But that was quite hard-hitting in that it had legal professionals trying to shape and manipulate somebody and their story into something that it wasn't in order to help his chances of getting off. Okay, and that upset lots of people at the bar, solicitors and judges.
There was a letter, right? We were looking this up beforehand. The Bar Council wrote to you or something like that?
The Bar Council wrote to The Guardian.
Okay.
The chairman of the Bar Council at the time wrote to The Guardian saying, the bar is not like this. Nobody in my profession would behave in this way.
Do you think that's true?
Total bollocks. Profoundly untrue. This is a bit boring, but I'm going to tell you this, right? What happens is that if I'm arrested for something terrible, first of all, I see a solicitor, okay? And the solicitor works out what my story is, takes a proof of evidence from me, in which I say what I think happened, okay? That piece of paper then goes to the barrister, right? So they get the piece of paper which says what the story is. But there are so many solicitors who say to clients, you don't want to be saying that, you don't want to be saying that, do you? Or, more likely, there's kind of all sorts of nods and winks that go on between professional and client, right? In which it's like, really? No. Okay, let's just think about this a bit differently, shall we? Couldn't it have been that, ... By the time you as the barrister get this proof of evidence, it's a worked on document, right? I don't then say to you, the client, is this true, what you're saying here, right? Unless it's plainly bunkum, and I want to put pressure on you to think about pleading guilty. I take it for what it is and get on with it. Right, so there's an awful lot of control of what people are saying by professionals, but it has to be like that, I think.
And as a playwright or a dramatist working with these institutions or these real world institutions, how important is verisimilitude? I mean, you talked earlier about having that limited amount of space you have for the courtroom scene.
Yeah.
What can you take exactly as is?
Okay, this is something. I've just been to see Darkest Hour, in which there's that now sort of semi-notorious scene in which Churchill goes onto the London Underground and talks to quote-unquote ordinary folk about how they feel about Hitler. And sure enough, they all tell him that we will never give up, we'll stand up to the pesky Nazis, and we're with you, Winston, right? Obviously it's a scene that never happened. Much worse than that
is the myth of the small boats from Dunkirk.
I'm going to come on to that, because that makes me cross too.
Yeah, makes me
but is that you see all of that scene. You see Gary Oldman get onto the tube carriage, have a number of conversations with real people, and get off the tube carriage, and you never leave the scene until he's finished with it. Okay, 2 scenes later, he's in the House of Commons reporting to members of Parliament that the people he'd been speaking to on the tube have said this and have said that and they haven't. We've seen that they haven't, right? Plainly, it's not being suggested by the makers of the film that Winston Churchill's making up what they said. It's just a kind of crass error. And I think it's something that you get when you know you're being untruthful, right? So I hate that film for all sorts of reasons. I hate it because it's boring. It says the same thing again and again and again. It feeds into that sort of desperate myth that we want to hold on to very, very tightly.
Did you see the thing Anthony Lane wrote in the New Yorker about depictions of Churchill in film? It was like a historiography of depictions of Churchill in cinema, and said that every performance of Churchill is basically about other performances of Churchill, not about that. But the point that I thought on that movie was the small boat scene at Dunkirk, because most soldiers were taken off by destroyers, right? The small boats were a sideshow.
Okay, there were 43 destroyers.
Yeah.
Okay, 39 British destroyers and 4 Canadian destroyers who took 2/3 of the people that came off the beaches. 200,000 soldiers came off the beaches at Dunkirk, brought off the beaches by the Royal Navy. It's a kind of real myth. I understand the power of myth.
But Dunkirk does the same thing, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It does.
But when is it legitimate to
However,
bend the truth?
I want to tell you about my own version of that, which I'm starting to think about much harder now. So I wrote a BBC film about Stephen Hawking. Him as a 21-year-old and first developing motor neuron disease and writing his thesis. And that's the story, battling against what he was told was 2 years to live and a crippling illness, fighting through, doing his physics. And Ben Cumberbatch, then kind of not very well known, was played Stephen. And in it I wrote a scene, right, which has Hawking on a platform of a station with a big idea that he can replicate diagrammatically with a piece of chalk on a station platform, right? It's a really simple diagram. It's a brilliant diagram because it tells you something really big, really simply, okay? And so I've got a choice as a writer. I can have Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose put it on a blackboard, right, whilst telling some students about it and describe the thing. Or I can have a really exciting moment where he jumps off a train, gets down on his hands and knees, despite the fact that he's suffering from this terrible condition, and write with a piece of chalk, draw with this piece of chalk, this terrific diagram which tells you all sorts of things about what the universe is doing.
And the diagram is real, is it? The diagram
is absolutely real. Yeah. I'll show it to you later. Yeah. It's fun. It's fabulous. But it's made up. Okay, it didn't happen. He didn't do that on a station platform, right? He had all of the thoughts and all of the thinking is his. He, in his book, is the diagram, and he can show. I can see it. He talked to me about it, but he didn't get down on his hands and knees on the station platform. And I used to defend that all of the time when people said, that was a great scene. And I used to confess to it being made up and see people's disappointment. And I say, yeah, well, it describes a bigger truth. It's a small scene telling a bigger truth, and it's a more dramatic way of doing it. I'm not sure I'd do it again now. And it
really?
Yeah. Even though it's not serving a myth like the Churchill scene or the Dunkirk film. It's not servicing a received wisdom. It's more exciting than it would be had I done it in a classroom with a blackboard. But I don't know, because I think it leaves an audience worried about what is not true in the rest of the film.
It's really interesting because my view is often, if the point of departure is a drama, like they're actors, they're not the real people.
Yeah.
I feel that you're kind of over that line already, and it's permissible. But I suppose there's two elements here. There's is it a specific historical story like 1940 or Stephen King, or is it a specific Milo like the law, but the story is a general? Do you regard that as two different categories?
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, because your question, Kassia, really was about whether I have a duty to be as truthful and as honest as I can about the categories, about law, is what your question really was, and I shifted into cosmology. I think, oh God, that's a difficult question. Okay, at the other
could you maybe look at it through Cambridge Spies and Silk as two examples? One is a specific.
So I wrote Cambridge Spies, and there was a screening and an interview session with a bunch of journalists, and a journalist from the Daily Telegraph said to me, "Did you make up any of the dialogue in this series?" And from that question, I saw the whole thing coming, right? But of course, I thought, I can't be bothered to play this game, right? So the answer is, of course I fucking did. Right? I wasn't present when Kim Philby and Angie Blunt discussed secrets and sold them and gave them to the Soviets, right? I wasn't there, so I don't know actually what they said. Everybody, most people who've written anything about that story, they're unreliable. Of course they are. They come from a very particular perspective, particularly the protagonists, right? So as a writer, I have to make it up. Okay. Cut to next day in the Daily Telegraph, you can see it, writer of Cambridge Spies admits making up stories. And I knew it was going to happen, but I think at some point you just have to decide, I can't be bothered playing that pathetic game of, otherwise you're a sort of dull politician, aren't you? I don't want to be that.
So with say, I suppose it's about it in process. So with Cambridge Spies, where there's a specific historical story, and you're going to build a drama around that. What's your process for that compared to, say, Silk, where there's a specific Milo, but the canvas is wide open in terms of where the narrative can go.
Okay, so, deep and long research and proper research. I've had, so I wrote a series called Silk, which is about barristers. I've had a few writers who've written for that. I had one instance where a writer wrote a draft of a script in which a judge bangs his gavel, okay, which tells me one thing, that writer has never been inside a courtroom in his life and didn't go into a courtroom when he knew he was writing an episode of Silk, because he would know that judges don't have gavels, right? And I can't believe it. I can't believe, and it makes me really worried and upset about television, because I think it's probably can be a sort of lazier writer's medium than others. I'm not answering your question for one, but I'm obsessed about stage directions at the moment. I think it's because I want to be a novelist, really, deep down. So I want to write beautiful stage directions. I want to write really well-formed sentences that when people read them, they go, we're making a great thing, because I love this writing, not here's another cliche which doesn't tell me anything as an actor at all, can't help me. You're not crying buckets of tears. You're just not as an actor. How does that help you as an actor if you're told to cry buckets of tears, right? It's a disastrous stage direction. It's profoundly unhelpful. You must work harder. No writer, no novelist would write that sentence. No self-regarding proper grown-up novelist would write anything like that sentence. Horrible cliche. Television writers shouldn't do it. I'm ranting. Why am I ranting?
We're tapping a rich theme.
Yeah.
So, what was the question?
What was the difference in your process between
Yeah.
something based on a particular historical story
Okay.
and something like Silk, where you've got the landscape,
Yeah.
but the actual root of the drama, you can make it up?
Okay. Proper research. Spend as much time as television can give you researching. Fight off everybody who wants you to start. Don't start until you're ready. Make sure that you have all the material ready to go. There's that kind of tipping point, isn't it? I think most writers kind of feel it when they are ready to go and stop researching. Quite hard sometimes to stop doing the research, get on with the writing. But I go and, so the project I'm doing in America about set in Chicago, I've just spent an awful lot of time in Chicago. I've been really lucky. It's simple. Find a brilliant journalist who's written about a lot, who spent 30 years writing about the subject you're writing about, police and their encounters with the African American community, right? And talk to him and get him to introduce you to everybody that he knows, right? It's just basic journalism, right?
Which is the David Simon model, right? He was the journalist.
It's so easy. Well, he was the journalist, but it's not that difficult, okay? And so often now I read scripts in that area, in that genre, and it's just obvious to me that they haven't been anywhere near any of the places they're writing about. Why wouldn't you do that when it's not difficult? Why would you could, if you want to? People don't even understand this. You can walk into the Old Bailey and sit in the public gallery and spend 8 hours watching a criminal trial if you want to. And I don't know why writers think they can do without. Writers for television do without that kind of research. It's sort of bizarre to me.
Well, a couple of questions. The first is, you described, we've sort of pigeonholed you as a plunger rather than a planner. And presumably, as such, you've worked very hard researching your first episode, you've created the world and you know where you're kind of going with it. And yet, as the story develops, it's going to bring in new information, new aspects, things that you hadn't managed to research possibly at the very beginning, but now you're writing, you're under a fair amount of pressure, and you're writing on the fly, episode by episode. How do you manage that? And is it a question of just getting a network of the right contacts?
Yeah, so people I can pick up the phone to at the end, in the thick of it, when it's all tough and you're writing fast, people that you can pick up the phone to and trust to give you the answers. So I don't know, Undercover had a story element which was about the execution of somebody in Louisiana. And I was just very lucky to have people who worked in that field, who represent people who are on death row. And I was able to pick up the phone in the middle of the night to them because they care about their subject. They care about it being represented properly in television, and say, what's the answer to this really hard question that I don't know the answer to? Help me, please. I suppose having the humility, actually, to say, I don't get this. Can you help me? You know much better than me. The group of writers that I'm going to work with in America on my new show will be people who know more than me about the subject that I'm writing about. I don't care so much how good they are at writing, actually, because I'm going to do a lot of the writing. But what's vital to me is that they can tell me stuff I don't know. And I think that's the kind of, right way to go with that. And keep that going through the process. You're right. You can't get lazy late on just because you're under pressure. You've got to keep asking people and keep finding the right answers if you can.
You talked a little bit more about the worry of people sort of seeing a mistake and losing faith in the whole series and the whole sort of thing comes tumbling down. Yeah. Has that ever happened to you, or either as a writer a bit, or as a viewer, where you see something and suddenly the magic starts to shimmer and die away?
Something that I've written, or something
you've written, or something that you've watched and had that experience happen to you.
I had a great letter complaint to the BBC actually about an episode of Silk, which was from somebody who lives in Lincoln's Inn, and said something like, I'm misquoting, but something like, I know for a fact that on a Sunday morning there would be no music playing in Lincoln's Inn. Right? I thought, what? Hang on, what's that about? And it was the score. It was the film written for the film, and she was complaining about the fact that there was loud music coming out of a building in Lincoln's Inn, was what she took it to.
What was it like? Your early ventures are set in the law, which is a world that you knew. Yeah. What was it like kind of moving beyond that? And I suppose the second part of that question is, what do you think about, what is it about institutions, be they the law or a village or the army, that are such fecund grounds to set a story in?
I think maybe it's places that have rules that everybody thinks really matter. Okay. And how sometimes it has to be the case that those rules have to be broken or circumvented. I think rules also always contain within them discretions that are interesting places for writers to go and for dramas to run. It gives you easily structure. So any trial has a natural structure which you can slot into, and it's a good one for storytelling actually. You get a speech at the end and you get a verdict at the end, and that's usually good news in terms of storytelling. And it matters, whether somebody goes to prison for the rest of their life or is executed.
Was it hard to get beyond that frame, as it were, if that's where you'd started with your storytelling, to move outside writing courtrooms?
So I've written 2 films about physics, one about Stephen Hawking and one about Einstein. Yeah. I failed my physics O-level. And I had the best time of my life finding out about their subjects, about that kind of physics, obviously to an incredibly limited extent, only as good as being able to talk about it seriously and properly in a room of other people who don't know anything about it and know better than that, right? But what a treat and what a privilege to kind of get to talk to Stephen Hawking about the beginning of the universe, or Roger Penrose about mathematics, the mathematics of the beginning of the universe. What a great shaming thing it was for me that I'd gone around in the world up until then thinking that kind of science was not of interest to me, and that it's okay to laugh at the fact that I failed my physics O-level and my maths O-level at dinner parties. And the obvious and much reported kind of equivalent to that is how impossible it would be for any of us to say, I've never seen any Shakespeare, which is a sort of arts equivalent to that kind of remark. And it's unforgivable, really, I think. So, yeah, lucky in that way.
And was there a kind of international element in that? You mentioned Heimat as the long German series. Did you, as an influence, did you feel that there is a very distinct, non-English language tradition with television, with drama that you wanted to engage with?
Yeah, so that was when I was starting to write The Village, which the same notion, one small place and history moves through it and the camera never leaves the village. So that was the kind of idea for the story, which I think is a simple and sort of effective one. But I go and see all the time, foreign language films and lots of German films actually, all the time, yeah.
I've got a couple of questions about kind of process and plotting.
Mm.
So you talked about how in BBC versus other other places where you have specific ad breaks that you have to work towards.
Mm.
Could you talk a little bit about what other constraints and devices that you use to create the rhythm of an episode or indeed a film?
Okay, well, that I mean, I've been writing about phone hacking. This is a film based on the Nick Davis, the Guardian journalist's book about phone hacking, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done by a long, long way, because the constraints are so specific and so exacting, and because the people that you're writing about are so litigious, or most of them. So it's writing a really difficult film with real problems in it, which I'll tell you about just quickly in a second, whilst knowing that you really, really have to be telling as close a version of the truth as you can possibly manage. And that's the big fat rule, really. And Nick, who is hugely helpful, continues to be hugely helpful, of course is a journalist, and of course is a particular type of journalist, and his only interest is finding the truth, right? And he does, he sticks to all those rules all of the time, at least two sources always, and checking and checking and checking. And he expects that of me, not a journalist, right? Not used to that kind of rigour, honestly. So that's been absolutely fascinating. And it's a real problem because, for example, there are two main lawyer characters in it, right? They're both called Mark. Right? And I know and you know that in the world of Hollywood, one of the lawyers is in the first half of the film and the other is in the second. And the second one doesn't arrive until halfway through. They in Hollywood would tell me, and I know they would, make it into one guy, right? I can't make...
Not change the name of the second one.
No, make it into one guy, right? We just want it to be one person, right? Give the first guy more of the second guy's story, change it a little bit, just do that. Okay, I can't do that. You really can't do that, It's interesting that I'm sort of talking about this specific instance, which is you couldn't think of a subject matter which more requires you to be accurate, truthful, and right, right? But actually, one really should be thinking about those things in relation to other subjects too. I suppose, because I think I probably have to confess to being a lot more, cavalier towards proper, exact truth in other things.
And on that notion of truth, where does Last Post fit into this, which is autobiographical, but different from your legal stuff, and it's based on an earlier episode of your life? Where did the interest? Had that been something you'd wanted to do for a long time? Yeah,
these are my first memories. So it's a story about a unit of military police officers and soldiers and their wives in Aden in the 1960s. And I was 3-4 years old when my father was posted there, so I was there. And they're literally my first few memories come from there. And then lots of family stories on top of those memories come from there. And so it's been something that I've been waiting to write for quite a long time.
And I was interested that I've watched 4 episodes, so not all of it, but you don't touch the kind of Mad Mitch piece.
No.
Which is, those who don't know, a Scottish officer who kind of jumped the reservation in 67, in some ways the best known story. It's kind of deliberately outside that narrative. But what I thought was very interesting about it was it's it's kind of it's not really a known place in the British story. People but it is this huge part of empire, and it seems to play. I suppose what I thought about it in terms of writing about the army with my book as well is what I've often found is you have these kind of stock properties. You have the officers and the the wives, and then the violence, which are all kind of, it's like the toolkit. And then what is interesting is how you interface those different bits. How did you go about? I mean, again, was that very research led, or what was your process?
So my mum is still alive, and it was lovely to me to speak to her about all those things properly in a way that my dad, who's not alive, hadn't really talked properly to me. Although he did say one thing to me, my dad, which was before he died, which was that he had his own Remembrance Day, which wasn't in November, but it was on another day, and I don't remember the date, but it was when a soldier died in his arms in Aden. Sniper shot him dead, and he died in my dad's arms. And on the date every year that happened, he took himself away and had a long walk and thought about all of those things. And so when he died and he wasn't around anymore to tell me any more about that kind of stuff, I sort of, turned to my mum, I suppose, for that. And of course she had a very different picture of life in the army in 1960 as a, married to an army officer.
I mean, I was, again, struck with that, and on the kind of verisimilitude thing, it seemed that there was one, the lieutenant, the guy who's cuckolded, I was suddenly thinking, he's too old to be a lieutenant, what's going on there, and stuff. And I was thinking, hang on, does that matter at all in that situation? I thought, probably not. Because as you say, like the tension, the institution is there for its rules and its customs, right? Yeah. That's what you're working from for that.
Yeah. But I suppose what I'm really interested in army terms is that all those men, and you know much more about this than I do, but all these men are asked to, without thinking, sometimes, often, do what they're told to do.
Yeah.
And you hear that all the time, that they say that. But these are also people, men and women, who are often incredibly smart, intelligent human beings, right? Way smarter than lots of film and television chooses to depict them, right? Yeah. And so that kind of deliberate kind of shutting down of your own thought process so that I must be a cog in the machine that works so that the machine works. It's an extraordinary thing to do. And I think I wanted to kind of you haven't watched the last 2 episodes, but I wanted to sort of test that and see what happens when good soldiers take a moral choice to step outside what they've been asked to do because they see a stronger right.
And I saw in an interview as well that you were kind of pushing against this notion of the kind of idiot officer, as it were.
Yeah, completely.
Why has that been such a long-standing trope, do you think, in TV, and what made you want to undermine it?
What wanted me to undermine it was that I've known throughout my life lots of soldiers who are just not like that. And it just felt to me like a great unfairness that they're being represented in that way, I think it's a pretty damn interesting life that you're asked to kill people for a living. And I think it's almost certain that people with those levels of intelligence must think very hard about what they're doing and why all of the time. I think to not represent that, to not write about that, is a terrible kind of failure, really.
And it also seemed to me that by having it in a counterinsurgency or a situation like that, in some ways you can avoid some of the kind of very linear narrative. You look at Band of Brothers or We Were Soldiers or something like that. It's the same formats, like the training montage back home, and then the unit going to fight, and then you cut back to the wives, and it is the story inevitably has to go in quite a straight line. Whereas if it's this mix between violence and not violence, you've got the scenes at the BP club and stuff like that, and things. But I was wondering again with that, and how much do you think about kind of arc when you're building your characters, like with the cuckolded officer, right? Who we see him, his wife is cheating on him in the first episode. He's not. He's not in great physical shape and everything. Yeah. And he has this kind of redemptive path, at least by episode 4. Don't break it to me what's going to happen. But
you're late. This is spoiler laden. We're gonna have to say this in the intro. I'm just like, no, stop spoiling everything.
But are you like consciously thinking about?
All of the time. Yeah, all of the time. Where's everybody going? Yeah. I mean, the tough stuff about The Last Post, for example, is that there are 8 main characters, 9 maybe. And you've got to keep them all up and running with proper stories and paying proper attention to all of them all of the time. And, first world problem. I'm not down a coal mine every day. It's fine.
Did you feel like, again, this is a massive spoiler alert, but that kind of very explicit sexual tension with the reporter and stuff like that, did you feel kind of obliged to put that in? Or did you think that was sort of...
necessary?
Was it necessary, yeah?
Do you mean that I was obliged to put in because all television to be watchable must have sex in it?
Was that...
No, is the answer.
Question answered.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is it, actually. I think that's the whole answer. Yeah.
I think that's it.
Well, actually, one thing I wanted to ask, on your next project, I don't know how much you can talk about this, but going going to the US, and you warned us off air that you're not a sort of guru and savant on the next age of TV and digital and stuff like that. But now obviously we're going to ask you about that. Yeah. But what are you doing next, and how does that American world that you're going into compare to the British one you've grown up in?
Okay, so first of all, how you get it made is completely different. So you go and pitch. That old Hollywood thing. It's also true in television in America. 40 minutes. I had 3 days of, I think I did it 10 times, the same pitch.
Do you have someone guiding? Do you have like an agent guiding it through?
You go in with a team. You go in with, I went in, so there were 4 producers with me.
Had they approached you?
Pardon?
Had they approached you?
Yeah. So then there were 5 of us in a room, and there might be 5 of them. And it's usually, big boardroom staff, and in you come and you do your 40 minutes of telling the story, and it's back to pretending to be incredibly spontaneous and much harder. All the people that you're with who've heard it 10 times also, pretending that they're moved again by what you're telling.
As well as the story, do you have to know sort of other things about sort of like what the locations would be, how much it'll cost? Do you have to bear that in mind as you're pitching, or is that
not how much it would cost? I mean, there are different sorts of ways of doing pitches. I think I just tell the story in quite a lot of detail, and
do you know that Martin Amis short story where they have a pitch meeting for a sonnet? And it's about a world in which screenwriters and poets fates are reversed, and so all the poets drive in sports cars and sleep with models and hang out and stuff like that. And all the screenwriters live in garrets sort of starving. And they have a pitch meeting for a sonnet where a sort of cigar chomping executive goes we love the quartet, and some of us are sold on the sestet, but basically no one's down with the couplet.
That's brilliant. That's so funny.
It's very, very good.
Yeah.
But was that alien being in that kind of environment?
I completely loved it.
Yeah.
Did you?
Actually, yeah.
Was it sort of a return?
I haven't done the proper work yet, or any of the proper work yet.
But was pitching sort of a return to the courtroom?
Yeah, it was great. I found acting. Acting. I found myself sort of standing up and walking over to the window and all sorts of shit like that. I mean, real nonsense, real nonsense, and finding myself really moved by what I was saying. I mean, that level of kind of bullshit, I think I'm sort of truthful in the moment. And sure enough, if you can do that, sure enough, they're moved too by you being moved. That's what they want. They think, conviction and passion. I don't suppose they're wrong, actually.
Can you tell us a bit about what the show is about?
Yeah, it's really simple. It's about a 17-year-old boy driving his mum's car on the south side of Chicago, hits a motorcycle. 17-year-old kid comes off a motorcycle and dies.
So it's the Bonfire of the Vanities.
He died. Yeah. The 17-year-old is the son of a judge. He goes home. He leaves the scene of the accident. He goes home, he tells his dad what's happened. And his dad, the judge, says, there's only one thing we can do here, which is the right thing, which is we have to go to the police station and we can try and explain why you ran away. You're 17, you panicked, I get it, let's go now, we have to go. On the way to the police station, the radio news is on, and the story is there's been a hit and run in Englewood in Chicago, which wouldn't ordinarily be a news story were it not for the fact that the 17-year-old boy who died, who was knocked off the motorcycle, is the youngest son of the main man in the biggest crime family in Chicago. At which point, judge and son turn around and go home and start to be corrupted in how they protect him from being sent into a justice system that the judge knows better than anybody is really unfair, really unsafe, really dangerous, and will probably end up in his son being dead.
Yeah.
So it's a fall from grace of a good liberal judge in order to, for good human reasons, protect his son.
And what's the title?
So it's based on an Israeli story. It's already been made, called Your Honour.
Okay.
Hard thing for me was I had to take the U out of the word honour. And I have to keep writing that in order to make it okay, and it's really difficult.
I had the same problem with my book, which is about colour.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You get 3,000.
7,000. Yeah.
There were 7,000 references to the word colour.
Yeah,
and
by far, I was sad enough to do one of those you can sort of plug in your text, and the words that are used most often are the words that come out biggest in a kind of illustrative diagram of the words that you use. And colour and colourful are the two most used words.
So your book becomes a much shorter book in America. There's that number of U's.
And it's really problematic because each page has the colour on the strip. So the layout was a nightmare.
I've been doing that thing of being in America and making myself not speak English. Only say things that could not be mistaken for an English person, which is American English and everything. Riz Ahmed did that in The Night Of, which was the American version of Criminal Justice that I wrote and everything. He went there and none of the crew knew he was British.
Really?
Throughout the whole duration of filming and everything, he never dropped the being an American, around the set and everything. Really impressive, don't you think?
Very impressive.
Yeah.
And conscious of time, but the final thing we should say, is it now a golden age for TV? I know you
God,
you're
yes.
not a...
God, yes. I had a note from, this is a completely different program, not connected to this American show, right? Yeah. Another thing I'm just developing, okay. This is the worst note I ever had, and profoundly true. You do know, don't you, Peter, there are 500 other shows on television at any given moment, right? By which she means fucking make it exciting on page one or we're dead. Having 500 things on isn't necessarily a good thing, but I mean, there's so much that's so great. And
people take more risks.
When I was writing Einstein, right, when I'd written Einstein, the BBC and me, and we wrote to a particular actor who's a big film actor and said, do you want to be Einstein, right, for the BBC? Okay. And he wrote back, I won't say who it is, he wrote back and said, you must be fucking joking. I'm a film actor. Don't ever write to me again, you cunt. Okay, so that's 12 years ago, right? Absolutely sure. Well, I've seen him in really big television, okay? And that's because he gets 13 hours of himself on screen. Quite right, that's the right choice now. He might have been right then. It might have been damaging for his career to be on a BBC film, but not now.
On that note, I think we should wrap up. Look, Peter, thanks for being such a...
Thank you so much.
Sorry about the use of that word.
No.
We'll warn people.
That's probably our strongest word ever on the podcast.
It's a quote. It's fine.
It's a quote.
We hope you enjoyed that. Now, a brief update from our lives, including, for the first time, a little bit about what we've been reading. Simon?
Yeah, so we decided we were going to have this new section about what we've been reading.
We need to think of a clever name for it.
Yeah.
Not what we've been reading.
Suggestions gratefully received. I have been reading fairly dense material this week. I've been reading legal judgments related to British Army accountability cases. But I also reread Anthony Beevor's History of the Battle of Berlin, which was very interesting. And more generally, I have been working on my book, so plus I change there, although I took some time off last week to finish a magazine draft for Harper's, and I've just started spinning my wheels for an assignment in Belgium next week. Kassia, what have you been reading?
I have been doing a few little book reviews. I like to, while I'm doing bigger projects like writing books, I also like to do sort of smaller pieces on the side. So I've been doing a couple of book reviews and reading books for that. So I did a piece for The Telegraph that looked at several colour books, which was really good fun. And I'm also now reading 3 books about Chinese design for a review for the TLS. And in broader news, I'm reaching, unlike Simon, whose book has been pushed back a little way and given him a nice amount of breathing room, I'm rushing towards my final deadline for publication in the autumn, which is very exciting.
Very exciting indeed. So, as ever, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Kassia Sinclair.
Our producers are Elizabeth Davies, Ed Kiernan and Olivia Crellin.
Our music is by Jess Danheiser, our design is by James Edgar, and Zara Hankier looks after our social media.
You can find us on all manner of social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter at Always Take Notes. No, we're not. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes. We're on Twitter at Take Notes Always. And our website is alwaystakenotes.com.
You remembered.
Almost.
And as ever, please do leave us a review on iTunes. So many of you have, and thank you very much for that. But we love hearing your comments and suggestions and tips on people who we can interview in the future.